Welcome to another edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. I'm Stacy Smith, and with me to talk about all of this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and I'm going to introduce them to you now. Former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett is with us. Mr. Corbett is the last Republican governor to be elected in Pennsylvania. He also served as the state attorney general and also as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Governor Corbett now teaches law at Duquesne University. Jim Byrne is the chairman emeritus of the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania. He also served in county and in city government. While never abandoning politics, Jim now practices law in the city of Pittsburgh. Keith Schmidt was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also consulted on Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign, and Keith has his own consulting firm. And Joe Mystic. Joe's background includes consulting Democrats across the state and serving in city government. Joe teaches law, and you can read his thoughts on life and on politics every Sunday in the Tribune Review. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. What a week it has been in politics this past week, so there's a lot to talk about. Now, the debate on Thursday night sent not ripples but shockwaves through the country and the Democratic Party. And then on Monday, the Supreme Court issued its ruling on presidential immunity, a decision which has angered Democrats. I have three attorneys on this panel, and one of them is Joe Mystic. So, Joe, you are a Democrat. You are also a professor of law. I'd like to have your initial reaction to the ruling.
Well, it's not breaking new ground entirely. It just clarifies the law in the past that as far as his constitutional duties are affected, he does have immunity. The president, whoever the president might be, has immunity to perform his constitutional responsibilities. So that's nothing new. Now, what is new is this area that the courts carved out called presumptive immunity, and they said that this involves actions that are on the outer limits, at the very edge of what the president's responsibilities may be, and that he should have some presumptive immunity for those things. And it doesn't tell us exactly what those things are. It will add perhaps far more confusion to this legal issue than clarification. And it does boot these things to the trial court to determine which of those things on the outer edge of a president's responsibilities are entitled to that presumptive immunity. So, that's not helpful. That's going to be far more complicated. It's a far reach from Nixon, in which we said no person is above the law. And it is a substantial change because what it does say is that a president could be above the law. Now, I think from a political point of view, this court may have saved Joe Biden's candidacy, because when people think about Donald Trump with more immunity in the presidential office, it scares the hell out of them. They want to run for cover. So I don't think that from a political perspective, this is necessarily bad for Democrats. But in terms of public policy, it's just not helpful.
It does take us away from the U.S. v. Nixon case, and it does create potential for danger, especially if you have someone in the office as former President Trump who will use this as a club, in my opinion, to go after enemies, real and imagined. It's very dangerous. This court, I agree with the professor, this court in the last two cycles has woken up the base of our party with Dobbs and now with this. The polls have suggested that there is a lack of enthusiasm, or there was a lack of enthusiasm for Mr. Biden, despite all of the accomplishments he has made in these last 3.5 years. This court is a glaring example of why it is important to reelect Mr. Biden, especially when likely we will have 2 vacancies coming up in the next 4 years. This court will continue, if Mr. Trump gets back in office, to carve away and eradicate many of the social reforms and historic social platforms and growth we've made as a nation in the last 75 years. So yes, Professor, I do agree. It's a little out of bounds. It's going to leave everybody scratching their heads on these presumptions. But at the same time, I agree with you. Another reason to starkly remind all of us that we have to hold serve in November.
I think it's left the general public confused. I think the general media has a hard time explaining without pulling out the decision and going through it line by line exactly what they mean. I see Joe nodding and agree with me on that. However, it was 6-3, and I don't think they necessarily, we're all going to vote or we're all not going to vote. There could have been dissent among those six. Obviously, I didn't think there'd be any dissent among the three, but there is I think it's a necessary part of the governing process that there be immunity for individuals in those kind of positions. We have the whole concept of sovereign immunities for people such as governors and people in the public service in doing their job. I think they could have defined it maybe publicly a little bit better. And if he's doing his job, that's one thing. If he's not doing his job, that's another thing. But isn't that almost a case-by-case basis? And I think they saw it as a case-by-case basis. And they're basically sending it back to the district court to decide, you decide whether it is. We're going to give you the procedure. We're going to give you the law of what we think, but it's a fact-based determination.
Keith, your
Hard
thoughts?
as it may be, pardon me?
I say your thoughts.
Good. Hard as it may be to believe, especially from my my Democratic counterpoints here, the esteemed gentleman, I think I'm just going to defer. I think we have three big time lawyers, and on my side of the equation, I have a former U.S. attorney and attorney general. I think I better learn how to just shut my mouth. I think enough was said on this issue, and I'll give back the remaining of my time.
That's a first.
That may be.
That is a
So,
first.
so I have to ask this to Jim and to Joe. There's a lot of talk after the decision on Monday that the Democrats may use the Supreme Court as a target in the presidential campaign. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, they're ripe, of course, to be a target, and because of some decisions, including Dobbs, that have run contrary to what is the generally accepted beliefs of the populace. So that might not be a bad strategy. I hate that strategy, to be honest with you. We've spent our lives in the law. We believe in the rule of law. The great majority of the courts and our judges are above reproach. They're just in it to make the right decision. That's all they want to do, and they do not have any political strategy, any political animus. The system is an incredibly wonderful system, unmatched throughout the world. But the guys at the top, they're not doing us any favors. And to the extent that the judicial process is taking some hits, it falls on them.
And I'll try to end it on this one. First of all, Joe, I kind of agree with you. I hate that approach of taking on the Supreme Court because, it's one side this time, it's going to be the other side the next time, and it just keeps going like that. Governor, you had something you wanted to say?
Yes. I mean, there have been campaigns and presidential campaigns going on for over a century discussing who is going to control the Supreme Court. This is nothing new. And if you've been listening to our prior show earlier, especially my good friend Jim Byrne from the Democrat side, since the Dobbs decision, he's been campaigning on the Supreme Court. When it comes to how the election is going to go this year, I think the general populace is going to be looking not so much at the Supreme Court, although it's a good thing for the Democrats to try and focus on. They're going to look at the individuals on this one, and they're going to do two things. They're going to say, should Mr. Trump actually be there, somebody with what he's been going through? And should President Biden be there, considering his age? And it's going to come down to those two decisions, not the Supreme Court.
I happen to agree with you, and I'll end this by saying a quote from the 44th President of the United States: elections have consequences. And as Jim pointed out, in 2 years or in the next 4 years, we could have two more openings in the Supreme Court. And if Democrats retain control, all of a sudden you've got 5 justices perhaps on the court that are on the liberal side. So, elections do have consequences, and the court swings back and forth. We need to take a break.
State level, Stacey. We've seen that at the state level.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Very much so. We need to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. The first presidential debate of the year was 5 days ago, and some of the dust has settled, or has it? I'm going to throw this open to a Republican to begin this part of the discussion. Keith, your reaction to what may have been, many have described as a disastrous debate for Joe Biden.
Nobody's surprised I have some comments on this particular subject. Listen, we all want to be proven right in our lives. We want to be vindicated. It's a human emotion. So, it's not lost on me that for 18 months or the better part thereof, I've been talking about the deteriorating mental capacity of the president and his cognitive issues. And I've been telling anyone who would willing to listen that I firmly believed that the Democrats in the end would not renominate this president. But that said, I didn't want it to play out the way it played out on Thursday night in front of millions of Americans and on a world stage. It was hard to watch, and I don't blame the president. I blame his handlers. I think they perpetrated a fraud on us over time. I think they were so drunk with power because clearly he's not running the country. But the people that want to run the country or who are running the country don't want to give up on it. And they cleared the field in the primary. They've given him limited exposure. They constantly rest him. They didn't have any debates in the primary season by clearing the primary stage. There's a certain insulation, and even Democrats and a lot of Democrats that I know are still angry that we're this close to the election and we're staring down a president who not only clearly cannot serve another 4 years. The debate that's raging since Thursday is this a president that can carry out his duties for the next 7 months? Are you comfortable waking up this nearly 82-year-old at 2 a.m. and the Joint Chiefs of Staff want to put your loved ones in harm's way and are explaining it to the president? Are we confident after witnessing what we did for 95 minutes on Thursday night that he's going to give an answer that we can depend on? And I know Stacey and I were chatting a bit during the debate, and we were wondering, is it going to be spun a different way? Well, let me tell you, you couldn't be a credible newsman or a columnist or someone who gives opinions on major stations and be ever credible in your life if you didn't call it what it was. I mean, even every major network,
I'll take a shot at that.
MSNBC, CNN, all calling them out. MSNBC said we can't send them to the convention. I mean, there's no MSNBC. I mean, they gave him 6 days rest, and this is what we got. So I have a real concern, over not only where we are in the election process and the challenges facing the crisis management in the DNC. And quite frankly, I all know that the first ballot, if he wants to stay, he stays. I mean, that's the rule. They'd have to change the DNC rules. I mean, I guess they can maneuver. Parties can do whatever they want. But as the rules are written now, unless he voluntarily steps down, you'd have to 25th Amendment him because you can't get him out of the way. It's his nomination on the first ballot. So it's a quandary. And putting anybody's animus or dislike or distrust for the Trump aside, this is a presidential. This is our president. This is our commander in chief. The Democrats are not the only one in crisis mode. All Americans, the entire world, is in crisis mode after that performance Thursday night.
Keith, I could have written what you were going to say, what you just said, because I know where you are. You've been saying it. You've been honest about it. Okay, so all I'm saying is, I get your message, but I would also like to add this, using your own scenario of the president being awakened at 2 or 3 in the morning by the Joint Chiefs of Staff having to make a decision. We know that really chief executives, we all know this, they set the tone and the values and the direction and the policy of an administration, but it's really the people around that chief executive who run things. And we saw that with Ronald Reagan. who had a great team around him, and they ran things well in spite of his mental deterioration throughout that second term. But that's not to say that he still wasn't setting the theme, setting the values of his administration. He did. People tried to meet his expectations. So that's the important part. But let's talk about waking somebody up in the middle of the night. I'm afraid that if they awaken Donald Trump in the middle of the night, his first response is going to be, "What's in it for me?" That's what I'm afraid of, because he is driven solely by pure selfishness. He has an inability to recognize the truth. And between someone who's old, even feeble, if we were to take some of the descriptions from the media, and someone who lies constantly, I'm taking the old guy.
Well, I had a number of takeaways. One, it wasn't a debate; it was a debacle. The entire country and the world had the opportunity to see. Because the world had an opportunity to see, I think we are less safe today than we were before that debate. Because our enemies saw what's going on at the top level of this government. And with all due respect to the people surrounding the president, they didn't help the president. And I'm not sure that experience of not helping him in that situation, that they're going to be able to help him in a dire emergency situation. And they now see that this country really is A, divided, and B, rudderless in the face of an emergency. That's what I took away from that. What do we have to hope for? You never want hope to be your plan. But we better hope that our enemies are still too concerned with our ability to respond than we are going to be able to look at the future and say, what is going to happen? And finally, I'm on my soapbox. I get to do it here. And I turned 75 last week. I am convinced that individuals 75 and older should not be candidates for the presidency of the United States. You just can't count on their intellectual capacity or their physical capacity. And I think it's time for the states to convene a convention on one amendment, and that is to max out the age that you can run for president. That's not going to make me popular, but I'm used to that.
Jim, your thoughts?
If the Joe Biden, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that anybody said so far, but if you saw the Joe Biden that came out Friday, if that Joe Biden had showed up Thursday night, we would be having a different conversation. But that is not what
I hate
happened.
that argument.
That is not what happened.
No, and Jim, you have to remember this. Some of the president's best moments in the last year, the State of the Union, that sort of thing, has been with the aid of a teleprompter. I worked with a teleprompter all my life. I know what it's like. And when that teleprompter goes on, if you can read and you can still put inflection in things, you can sound really, really good. And then when that teleprompter goes off and you're in a talk show like this, you may not be able to handle yourself.
My
So that's
teleprompter's working fine. It's right over there. So, it's right over there.
See, I know what you're saying, and I think that shows the folly of how much value we put on these so-called debates. They're not debates; they're public performances. And if you have a teleprompter, you perform well. We've all done that. Without the teleprompter, with notes, you do less well.
Yep.
And then without the teleprompter or the notes, you do even less well. That's the nature. But why are we putting all this value on that? I want to say
because of what happened, Joe. I mean, I love this stretch that we're going through about the problem that Reagan had, or I think Obama had a bad debate. Nothing compares to what we saw for 95 minutes on Thursday night. It was unbelievable. You can't compare it to anything that's ever happened in the history of this republic for a sitting president to play out on the world stage. It was a disaster.
John Fetterman.
Oh, no.
That was a horrible, horrible debate.
Well,
It
let me
wasn't,
tell
it
you
didn't
something.
rise to the level
And
of a
John
debate.
Fetterman won that race after, and that was
And he
after
wins that
mail-in ballots
race.
were
That's
in.
exactly right.
Mail-in ballots were counted. There might have been a different outcome if mail-in ballots hadn't already been counted
He
in
wins
that
that
race.
race. That's our system. He won.
Well, I'm just telling you, for anybody to make comparisons, and I love your comparison about Trump, but I said leave Trump alone. You have to deal with what we have to deal with the sitting president of the United States right now. And I'm giving you a way out, guys. I've always said there's one guy that I think Trump could beat, and that's Biden. I'm telling you guys, figure it out. I mean, if
Both
you put
parties,
anyone else in, I think he has a hard time.
both
So
parties would
I'm
replace their
actually
leading
encouraging you
candidates
to
in
help you
a
hold the
perfect
White
world.
House.
Both
What's
parties would
that?
replace the top of the ticket in a different world, in a perfect world. I don't think either one of them should be running. I think both parties can do better. And I'm not saying
I
Joe's doing
agree.
a job.
It's,
You know, Joe's
We
doing
all
a
agree
great. He
with
did a
that.
great
I
job.
think it's close to 80% of the
all agree
American
with that.
people agree with you, Joe.
Yeah,
Without
Nobody's going to
question.
disagree with
you
that,
know,
Joe.
come on,
Yeah.
but that's not where we are. We got to face reality. I
Yeah.
mean, I can talk
Well-
about fantasy land. Reality is this is who we have to pick.
I do want to.
Guy.
I need to wrap this up, or we can continue it after we take a break. But I will say this in case we don't continue it on the matter of Donald Trump. He avoided so many questions when asked by the moderators. You know, are you going to cut a deal with Ukraine? No answer. Are you really going to try to deport 10 to 15 million people, some of whom may have be married to a spouse who's an American? No answer. On tariffs, Social Security, the list goes on. He didn't answer. And the surprising part is, and this maybe to Keith's point here, is that in his earlier days, Biden would have jumped all over that as a debater, and he just stood there and let these things go by.
I'll tell you who really caught that better than anyone. The First Lady, when she patted him on the head and said, "Joe, you answered every question."
Yeah,
I remember that after when they took him to the Waffle House and she patted him like she was talking to a 10-year-old. You answered every question. Oh
well,
my God, it was
I
hard
think
to watch.
I'm going to wrap it up
Lord
by
have
this
mercy.
comment. I think the most disappointing part of that debate, besides the fact that neither one of them would answer or do anything, and they got into stupid, childish things about their golf game.
Handicap.
I think the most disappointing part is that neither one of them offered us a vision for what they really want to see America look like in the next 4 years. And that really was the disappointing part for me. All right,
Mason, one last question. How's your golf game?
I have given up golf, as a matter of fact. So, and we'll get into that another time. It's not because I'm that bad, but I am. But there are other extenuating circumstances, shall we say. All right, gentlemen, we have to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment. Let's see here. We only have about 6 minutes to go here, so we'll do this one. All of you have advised campaigns in the past. Most observers say it's been a good week for Donald Trump and a bad one for Joe Biden, as we've just talked about. So, Jim, as the former Democratic State Party chairman, if the Biden campaign called on you for some advice, what advice would you give the Biden campaign at this moment?
Better communications, hit on the issues, hit on the accomplishments of the last 3.5 years, and believe me, there's plenty. 6 minutes is not enough time to go through those issues. Hit them again and again and again and again. More effective comms, more communication about what he's done in his vision for, like you just said, and like we said in our last segment. What is your vision to continue on the foundation you have built with the stocks, with the jobs, and with everything else that you've done? Some of it, many of which, like last July, in a bipartisan fashion. Stability, steady leadership versus incoherence, chaos, and pathological lying. That's what you got to continue to do from now until November, and don't let up.
All right. Anybody else want to jump in? No, that's it.
No.
Okay. All right. Then if you're on the Republican side,
I'm sorry if I offended anyone.
Yeah, no, I don't think you offended anyone. I think you just, took talking points away here. If you're on the Republican side, then what would you tell the governor? The former president.
Who, me?
Well, no, either.
I have plenty to tell the former president.
Oh, I know. No, I'm talking to the two Republicans with us.
Go ahead, Keith.
No, I mean, listen, I don't think you should pile on at this point. I think hard to believe that the former president kind of let Biden self-destruct to a degree, and it was hard to watch. And I don't wish that upon anyone. He's my president too. There's very little discipline with Trump's faces and pointing and talking over I mean, somebody did coach him well. He finally took advice. I mean, he looked straight ahead. He didn't answer every question, but he wasn't a clown, which was hard. I thought, my God, somebody must have really counseled him. And I don't think it's a time to pile on. I think it's time to let the process work. And I see my two Democratic colleagues don't agree with me, but I really still believe you guys are going to figure it out. I really don't think. I think it's going to get worse and not better in the coming weeks. I think that the pressure is going to mount. Either they're going to change the rules, or going to try to convince the president to stand on, and you guys are going to come up with a different set of a different ticket in August. I firmly believe that. I believed it for a year and a half, and certainly after Thursday, I'm not going to believe differently now. I mean,
Keith,
but I just don't think.
I seek your counsel often.
What's that?
As I seek your counsel often, and this would not be an exception. I think it's good advice.
Can I add in this that the election is going to be determined by the people that are in the middle, not the right, not the left, but the people in the middle, and I think that middle ground has grown. If you look at the polls, and if I were advising the former president, what I'd be telling him is, you have to give them a reason to vote for you. Mm-hmm. Don't talk about Biden. President Biden, everybody else is going to talk about. What new policies do you have? Distinguish yourself somehow. Very difficult in the landscape that we have. Very, very difficult in all the commercials. But I think people are 80% of the people are concerned. Why should I vote for you as compared to Biden? Or if there's another presidential candidate. Last comment, good friend of mine, former Governor Schweiker, said to me, both candidates are lucky that they're running against the other candidate because they couldn't beat anybody else.
That's kind of what Keith has been saying all along. I'll wrap it. We'll also wrap this up in. Well, I kind of forgot my train of thought. Hello, Mr. Biden. I'm right there with you, I guess. I don't know.
We all do a prompter.
Yeah, I didn't have the prompter anymore, so that's what happened. So, all right. I know what I was going to say. It came to me now, and that is that the other interesting part about the debate and what the governor just hit on here is that the early polls indicate that Mr. Trump really didn't gain any ground as far as the polling goes. He didn't win over anybody. It's just that Mr. Biden has lost some support. And maybe you're right, Governor. Maybe that's where they're all going to go, is that middle, and they're going to walk into that either two things. They're either going to walk into the voting booth not knowing for sure who they're going to vote for, or they're going to sit at home, which would not be good for the country either.
Or they're going to walk in there and skip the presidential.
Yeah.
And go down. I can say I think that most of the Democrats that are running down ticket from the president were concerned by his performance as to how it would affect them in their races.
Yep. Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It was a good discussion today. And, the great thing about politics is it will all change by the next time we get together in a couple of weeks. Yep. Thanks again for joining us for Trunk and Tales, especially Joe, Jim, the governor, and Keith. And we'll see you the next time. Thanks for joining us.